All right, in this lesson, we are going to work on some more JavaScript. We're going to talk about arrays and objects in Java and how to manipulate data to make our page more interactive. So let's look at where we have some setup. So I've done a little setup here just to save time. I've got an HTML document here. My script file is empty, and I've got some CSS that I've applied to the HTML document. It currently looks like this when we load it. It's got a table with the first name and last name, an empty column over here, and then it's got a counter at the bottom for names, and it's got some buttons. And currently none of this does anything. I can type stuff in, but currently none of it does anything. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to create an array. An array is very simply just it's a single name, like a variable, but inside that single name, you can store multiple things. So instead of as like the variables that we've been using, counter equals one, uh, things like that, we can create an array and then we can stick more than one thing in the array. And then we can access that array by by using a for loop or by accessing individual elements using a subscript notation. So let's do a quick example with that. So what I want to do first is in my JavaScript, I'm just going to create a very simple array and I'm going to load the table. So and then after we load the table, then we'll work on the rest of this of the work here by adding new names to our list. Okay, so in my JavaScript, what I want to do, I've already got the script wired up into my HTML. I wanted to go ahead and just create an array here. So I'm going to say let names equals new array. Okay. So this is me defining a variable called names. It is defined as an array. These are square brackets. This is now just an array. It's an empty array. There's nothing in it. Okay. So if I save that and re-render my page and we can look at the console, if I come in here to the console and I say show me names, we're going to see names as an array and it's got nothing in it. It has length of 0. Okay. Now let's go ahead and load something into array. So to load it, I want to be able to create a function and I want to be able to send a first name and a last name to the function. I wanted to create an object called a name that has a property of first name and a property of last name. And then I want to save that into the array. So let's call the function here, save name, um, save name, and then we're going to say first name, last name. Okay, so that's good calling the function. Let's go ahead and call that twice, and we can say, um, okay. Now let's go ahead and write the function save name. It accepts two parameters, first name and last name. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create an object. An object is simply a variable that has multiple properties. So we can create an object with a property of first and a property of last. The way we create an object is we say let and we can say name. So I'm naming my array plural names, and I'm naming my individual objects singular name. So I'm going to declare that as an empty object using the curly braces. Okay. Name is now an object that has no value in it. Okay, it's just an empty object. But now I can add a property just by saying name dot first equals first. Okay, so now I've added a property to name. Property is called first, and the value of that property is going to be whatever's in this array or whatever is in this parameter first. Then I can say name dot last equals last. Last thing I want to do is I want to push it onto the array. So then I can say names dot push name. So now I have created an array and it has one element in it. It's actually going to have two because I've called the function twice. Okay, let's save that. Go back to our function. I've refreshed the page. Now, if we look at names in the console, we can see that it's got two elements in it. And if I open that up, I can see that I can say show me names at 0. And now I have an object first and last. Okay. So if I say show me all of the names, then I should be able to see them all here. See, there's my first and my last for the two elements I put in. The array has a length of 2. Each element in the array, the 0 element and the 1 element has a property called first and a property called last. This index here, the 0 and the 1, this is called the index into the array or an element number. And it is all of the arrays start at 0. So the first element in the array is numbered at 0. The second element is numbered at 1, etc. And so in this case, we have a length of 2, and we have an element in the 0 position and an element in the 1 position. Okay, so now we have an array. So let's go ahead and load that array into the table. So we can see that in my table, I've got a body here called name table. So what I'm going to do, just like we have in previous assignments, is I'm just going to write a function that creates a row and just inserts it in there. So I want to do that when the page loads. So what I'm going to do is on my body tag, I'm going to put an onload element, and I'm going to say render table. Okay. Then I'm going to come back to my JavaScript, and I'm going to write a function called render table. What this function is going to do is just take the array that's defined as a global in my JavaScript and just render it into the table. So we need a for loop. A for loop consists of it's code that runs multiple times. So how you define the for loop determines how well it runs. And so you can read about this on W3 Schools. There'll be a link in the module. So the way we define it is we use we type for, and then we use uh, um, three definitions. The first thing we want is where does the counter start? So we're defining a counter, we're defining a limit, and we're defining an incrementer. Okay. So we have counter, oops, counter, and then we're going to do an increment, and we're going to do a limit, and then we're going to do an increment. Okay, so this says the counter is what iteration of the for loop am I on? Is this the first, second, third, etc. The limit tells me when I'm going to stop the for loop, and the increment tells me how to increase or decrease the counter at the end of each block. So the way we define this is we just use a counter variable. So you could call this count, whatever the general standard is to call it I, and then you separate those by semicolons. So we want I to start at 0. We want I to be less. We want to continue as long as I is less than names.length. And then we want to increment I by 1 at the end of each iteration. So now we have a for loop. The for loop starts at element 0. It runs until we get to names.length. So in this case, names.length is 2. So we're going to run at 0 and 1. Notice I'm using a less than, not less than and equal. So I'm going to run I is going to equal 0. That is less than names.length. I'm going to run my block. I'm going to then increment I by 1. I is now 1. I is less than names.length, which is 2. I'm going to run my block, and then I'm going to increment I by 1. I is now 2. That is not less than names.length because names.length is 2, so 2 is not less than 2. It's equal to 2. So at that point, my for loop will end, and I will exit the function. So now once we're in the for loop, what we want to do is we want to add a row, and the row we want to add is we want to send contacts. Um, we want to send contacts we want to address the array using the I element. So in this case, it will be the first time it runs, it'll be contact at element 0, which will be Bill Neely. And then the next time it runs, it'll be contact at element 1, which will be Anthony Kiedis. And then the function will be over. Okay. Now let's go ahead and define that function add row. This one should be familiar. We're going to accept 2 parameters, where one parameter is going to be called the name. Oops, that's names. We're going to accept one name because we're passing a single element in the array. So the array is called names, but each element is a name, singular. So we're gonna accept one parameter called a name, and then we're going to create a row. So we're going to say let row equals, and I'm just going to do this in multiple steps just so that it's easier to read. So um, we create the TR, and let's create a TD. And I'm just doing this in multiple steps just so that it's a little easier to read with all the concatenations. Then inside the first TD, we'll put the first name, which will be name dot first, and then we'll end the TD. We'll do that again for the last name, and then we'll end the TR. Okay, so now that should be a whole row. Okay, now we just insert that into the DOM. The location we want to insert it into is here at name at the ID name table. So we're just going to do a get element and use the inner HTML. Document.get element by ID, name dash table, and then the inner HTML, we want to add the row. Okay. Last thing we want to do is update the name, the count here at the end. Now, if we go back and look at the DOM, I have the count is here in a footer, and it is in a span, which is me just defining a little bit of data, and it's in the span, and it's called name count. So I can now just use document.get element by ID, name dash count, and here I'm going to do the inner HTML, and it's going to equal names.length. All right, let's see if that works. All right, perfect. Okay. I don't really like this third column over here. The reason I'm getting 3 columns is because I have a call span on this, just left over from some other work I was doing. So I'm going to go take that off. So that's making that bottom column 3 wide. Okay, that's better. Okay. So so now we're rendering our array. So if we look at names, we can still see that it's got the 2 elements in it, and everything seems to be working just fine. Now, what I want to do now is when I want to be able to add a new name. So what I want to do is when I click new name, I want to show this form, and then I want to add things into it, and then click save or cancel to either save the element, save the name, or cancel, which is just to hide the form and and go back to the main view. So what I want is for this form to not be visible when the page loads, because it doesn't really make sense here, right? If I have a new name button. So I'm going to hide this form when the page loads. So we do that using some CSS. The form is called name-form. So what I can do is I already have a style element for name-form where I'm centering the text. So I can just turn it off at the beginning. So I'm just going to do display none on my CSS. Now when I load that, the element is not visible. It's still there. If we do an inspection of the page, we can still see that the form is still on the page. It's just not visible because I have it as a display none. Okay, so so now let's go ahead and code the new name so that it shows the form. Okay, so what I want to do is on the new name on the button right here, I'm going to go ahead and add an on click, and we're going to say show form. Okay, then in my script, write a function. We'll call that show form. Takes no parameters. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get the style for the uh, for the for the form, and I'm going to change the style of the display value. So I'm going to say document dot get element by ID. The form I want is called name-form. Then I'm going to say in the style set display. Oops, it's not that. So I have a property bag called style. It has a property called display, and then the value I'm going to set is block, because that means I'm going to see it. Okay, if it that's going to reverse what I have here. My default style of display none. It's going to set it to block, which is the default value, which should make it appear if we did this right. So reload that page, new name. I got an error. Style.display is not a function. Style.display. Oh, it's an equal, not a, it's not a method. It's a value, it's a property. Equals block. All right. Been doing it a long time, still make mistakes. Okay. So there we go. Now we hit new name. Form is there. These other two buttons don't work. When we hit cancel, what we want to do is we want to hide the form. So what we can do here is we can just create another function called hide form, and we'll just set that back to none. Okay, so now we can reload this, new name, cancel. Cancel doesn't work. Doesn't work because I didn't put the event on the button. So I have this hide form now. I need to come back in here to my element, and on the cancel, I'm going to add an on-click equals hide form. Reload that, cancel, cancel, new name, cancel. Okay, that works great. So now what I'm going to type in here, and then I want to click save, and then what I want to happen is I want to validate that these fields are not empty. And if they're not empty, then I want to put them into the list of names. So let's cancel that. But notice what's happening is when I cancel it and click new name again, whatever I typed in before was already there. So let's watch that again. I refresh the page, new name, the page is empty. I fill some stuff in, I click cancel. This should just delete the information, should get rid of the information. So when new name comes back, these should be empty. So what I'm going to do is either when I show the form, when I hide the form, I need to clear out the data. I'm just going to do it when I show the form. So I'm going to come back here to show form, and before I set it to block, I'm going to just clear out the elements. Document.get element by ID. I'm going to get the input box. The input box is called first dash name. And it's an input, so it has value instead of inner HTML. And I'm just going to set it to blanks. And then I'm going to do the same for the last name. Okay, so let's go ahead and reload that. New name, cancel, new name, first, last, cancel, new name, values are gone. Okay, working perfectly. Okay, so now what I want to do is when I click the save button, I want to validate that these first name and last name are not empty. Now we've done this in other assignments. So we know that we're gonna get the value of the box. We're gonna test it to see if it's empty. We're gonna count the number of errors that we get. We're gonna turn the border of this box red, and we're gonna display an error message to pop up if there's an error message. If there's not an error message, then we'll just add it to the table. We'll add it to the table by adding it to the array and then re-rendering the table. Okay, so let's do the validation. So let's wire up a validation event. So on the save field, we're just going to do on click equals validate form. Okay. Come into the JavaScript. Let's go ahead and say function validate form. All right, so let's do the validation. So the way we did this in the previous assignment was we just counted errors, and we had a function that validated data. So let's say let errors equals 0. So there are currently no errors on the form. Then we're going to say errors plus equal validate not blank, and then we're going to send the name uh, of the ID of the element we want to validate. In this case, it's the first name. And then we're going to do that again for last name because it's the same validation. If we had a different validation, like we're doing an email, we would have validate email here instead of not blank, or validate numeric or whatever, and we would have different validation rules. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and create that function. I'm just going to stub it because I want to finish the validate form method, but in order to do that, I have to have validate not blank. So I'm going to create a stub which just says validate not blank. It's going to take an ID, and then I'm just going to return one. So what this does, this is just we call this stubbing. I've just created a method just so that my code will load into the page. It is basically going to always be an error. So regardless of what I type in to the text boxes, there's always going to be an error, which means that I can continue to test validate form, then I'll come back in a minute and finish the actual validation logic. So here with validate form, what we want to do is want to say if errors is not equal to zero, well, if it's not equal to zero, then what we want to do is we want to say alert correct the errors and resubmit. Okay, so let's try that. Did that work? So new name, save, correct the errors and resubmit. Okay, so it's so that's working. The validation is not actually taking place because it's always going to do that because I've just stubbed the validator. Okay, so let's everything else is still working. So now let's go ahead and work on this validate not blank. So now what I want to do here is I want to test the value of the element that's being passed in as a parameter. So I'm going to say let value equals document dot get element ID. The ID I want is the one that's defined in the ID parameter and as a value because it's an input box. And then I'm going to say if value dot length. The only input requirement here is that it's not blank. So if value dot length equals 0, then I want to invalidate the box. So now I'm going to say document. I want to turn the border red. Document dot get element by ID. ID. We turn the element red by adding a class. So in my style, I've added a class here called invalid that turns the border color red. So what I want to do is to the input ID, I want to just get the class list, and then I want to add the class of invalid. Okay. And then I want to return that there's an error. So I'm going to return a 1. Okay. Otherwise, I want to return a 0 because there's no error. Okay. I also need to remove the invalid class. So we'll say dot remove invalid. Okay. So now what should happen is the text box should turn red if it's not valid. Okay, let's try that. Refresh, new name, first name. So if I save, correct the errors and resubmit, and both my boxes turn red. If I do one correctly, then that's not red anymore, but the other one is. Okay, so now both things are valid, but I haven't coded the logic to actually save it yet. So let's go ahead and do that part. So that logic is up here. If the errors is not equal to 0, then I alert and say correct the errors and resubmit. Else, what I want to do here is I want to save the contact or save the name. So I already have a method that does that called save name that I wrote up here in order to get some test data. Okay. So now I can just come in here in my validate function. I can say save name. And the values is going to be, well, let's go ahead and do that in the let. So let first equals document dot get element by ID first name. And we'll get last. And I'm just cutting and pasting just to save typing. And then I'm going to say save name, and I'm going to send it 2 arguments, first and last. And that method has already been defined because we wrote it right at the beginning when we were getting test data. It's going to create a new object called name, and it's going to push it onto my array. Okay. Once that's done, I want to add it to the table. So let's go ahead and run that and see what it does. So when we refresh this, if we look at names in the console, we have 2 elements, right? If I go ahead and add a new name and save, okay, if I come back here and look at names again, names is now, oops, names. Names now has three elements in it. Okay. Those three elements are going to be, oh, there's a zoom thing on my window there. So names is going to be three. I can come in here. This my zoom is getting in the way. Let me refresh this and do this again. So new name, first, last, save. Now when I come into names, I can see names here is going to be three elements in it. Bill Neely, my two test datas, and then the first and last name. I've made a mistake there somehow because I'm not getting the actual values. I'm getting the elements, the object itself, the text box itself instead of the name. So the content. So let's come back and look at that. That is, I want the value. I left out the value here. So I need to get the whole, I just need to get the value, not the whole text box. I don't want to put the text box in the element. I want to put the value of the text box in the element. So refresh that, new name, first, last, save. Now when I come and look at names, it's now three and have the elements in there, but it didn't add it to the table here because I didn't call the render function. So once I save it, I want to call render table. Okay, that'll rebuild the table. Okay, refresh, new name, first, last, save. What happened here? So I re-rendered the table, but I added the data that was already in the table. So what I need to do is at the beginning of the render, I just need to clear the form. So I just need to empty the table. So I can just set the inner HTML to nothing in the render table. So right here at the very beginning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say documents dot get element by ID, and the element I want is name table. And I'm going to say the inner HTML is just equals nothing. Okay, so this will just clear out whatever's in there. Let's see if that works. New name first, last, save. All right, added. But my form didn't go away, so I can just keep clicking save there. That's not what I want. Okay, so when I finish, once I've entered valid data and I've added it to the table, I need to go ahead and hide that form again. So we already have a hide form function. It's called hide form. So now when we go to validate form and once we render the table, let's just hide the form. Okay, this should be it. New name, first, last, save. All right, that's looking good. Let's go ahead and do another one. New name, new name. Okay, perfect. That is working exactly how I wanted it to. All right, so that's an example of how to create an array in JavaScript. In this case, the array is an array of names. Each element in the array contains an object called name. So we have a plural, names is an array, contains multiple instances of the object name. And then each object has a property, first and last name property, and we're rendering that into the table, and we're using this form um, to create new names, and we're using some JavaScript to do some validation and to create and hide the form accordingly. Okay, so I hope this was useful. This video will be posted, of course, and then the code that I have here will be posted in the Canvas module for you to look at as you work on your assignment.